Halloween of '01. From the title, you know this happened in 2001 on Halloween. Halloween night to be specific. I was 7 years old. If you want to know my current age, do the math. My mom helped me remember this one. So if there are further questions, I will ask her as she remembers the night vividly. It was freezing, probably within the 20 to 30 degree range. I was hell-bent on going out anyways. I wanted my pillowcase to be stocked full of sweets, damn it. I dressed as a cat. Not too hard to imagine that. Now, at the time, I had zero idea, but my rock star mom was on it, and you can thank her on her on-par memory. My mom noticed a very tall man dressed in all black. Mom said he had black jeans on, black trench coat, and a black hockey mask. He had no kids with him, so that was a huge red flag to my mother. He did have a pumpkin basket to put candy in. He followed us around, house to house. Always stayed back 3 or 4 houses according to Mom. After 20 or so minutes, she shrugged it off, thinking this was just some really tall kid just innocently out trick-or-treating. But the more she said she kept shrugging it off, the more uneasy she felt. Now I do remember my pillowcase was only half full, and my mom hurrying us home, and me being super pouty about it. I do not, however, remember Mom putting the house on lockdown after we got in the front door, but she remembers and said she did it very quickly. I ate some candy, brushed my teeth, got into bed. Mom laid down next to me. Now this is where my mom really helped me out with this story, as I had no idea until we talked about it earlier. Fast forward to morning, there was a pumpkin basket full of candy, with a note on top that said, "Meow," in chicken scratch, on our front porch, right outside the front door. My mom threw out the candy in case it was tampered with, and she burned up the note. Now, what really creeps me out, and I just found out from my mom earlier, is that in the middle of the night, she got up from my bed to recheck the house, looked out the window and saw him, in our front lawn, staring at the house with a pumpkin basket in his hand. She didn't think he noticed her. She called the police immediately. She briefed the officer on what happened. The officer said he'd do a few rounds and patrol the area. My mom never heard back from the officer that night, or ever, she said. Mom also told me she stayed up the entire night with a pistol in her lap after seeing him in the front yard. Since that night and up until right now, nothing weird with him has happened since. But as for his intentions, zero idea. Creepy man on Halloween. I'm 13 years old now, so this happened 5 years ago when I was 8. It was Halloween, and every year we go to my grandparents' house. My uncle, who was 14 years old, was taking me and some of my cousins trick-or-treating. It was dark, but there were some people outside waiting on the fireworks show. We trick-or-treated here every year, so we know the neighborhood. Everything was going normal, but I was older this year, and we wanted more candy, so we decided to go to another neighborhood we never went to before. We went to the first couple houses, and we were all joking around. My uncle was chasing us, and I fell. My knee started bleeding. I thought there was a lot of blood, but I was 8 years old, so I was probably being dramatic, so I wanted to go back to my grandparents' house to get a band-aid. My uncle was going to take everyone back with me, but I told him it wasn't that far, I can just go back alone, and I was the oldest cousin, so I didn't want to be treated like a baby. When I turned around the corner of the street, there was a man walking alone coming towards me. He looked pretty normal, so I wasn't really scared of him. He stopped in front of me when he got close enough, so I stopped too. He asked what I was doing out alone, and seemed pretty friendly. I told him I was going back to my grandma's, 'cause I cut my knee when I was trick-or-treating. He said his house was right down the street, and he could get me fixed up in a couple minutes, and I could go back trick-or-treating again. I thought this was a good idea, because my mom and dad might not let me go out again if they knew we were messing around and I got hurt, so I was stupid and decided to go with him. When we got back to his house, he got me a drink and a band-aid, and I was sitting on the couch. He came and sat really close to me, and I started getting scared, because he was acting weird now and not really talking much. He put his hand on my leg and started moving it around. I just jumped up and I went to run out, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back hard. I started crying and telling him to just let me go, but he just started acting friendly again and asked why I want to leave already. I didn't know what to do and sort of just froze now, and just stayed there because there was nothing else I could really do. Time passed, and I guess I was there longer than I thought, because I heard my uncle shouting my name from the street, so he must have gone back to my grandparents' house and realized I wasn't there. The windows were open, so it was pretty loud. I jumped up again, and the man saw my reaction and realized it was someone looking for me. I ran out the door this time, and he just let me go. I told my uncle, and we both ran back to my grandparents, and my dad called the police. I was too young then, so my parents didn't tell me, but the guy was actually known by the police as a sex offender. Halloween shadows. Halloween is my favorite holiday. Is, not was, despite the events that unfolded one crisp Hallows Eve when I was about 16 years old. At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and cousin in a big but old house that sat in a cul-de-sac close to Main Street. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and it had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town. Crime seemed minimal in the area, and I made my way out that Halloween night to make the most of the best day of the year. It wasn't just what happened that night, though. It was, of course, what came afterwards, and one small incident that came before. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousin arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of dudes taking photos of our house. Weird, but when approached, the men seemed friendly and complimented our Halloween setup. It was pretty great, that is true. The men sped off without incident, and were quickly forgotten. My stepbrother and cousin re-entered the story Halloween night, the big event itself, at about 3 a.m. Both had been out drinking with their friends, and as such, both had left their respective vehicles and braved the icy walk home on their own. Cousin arrived home first, but couldn't seem to get his key in the lock, so just sat on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up. He did, about half an hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being an uncoordinated goober, he went to unlock the door himself and no luck. So they bit the bullet and called my mother, waking her up to let them in. She was, of course, unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at this time of night, and didn't buy their story about the wonky lock. They insisted, though, and to shut them up, she finally relented and tried her key. She too could not get her key in the lock. Annoyed, tired, and now just confused, she wrote it off as a problem for tomorrow, and the three of them hit their respective hays. One other person arrived home late that night, me, though I arrived much earlier than those two, and was in bed by about midnight. I woke up close to 1 a.m. still tired. All I could feel was anxiety, and I didn't know why. At first, I tried to tell myself that I just got a bit too into the holiday spirits, and I psyched myself out. But then I noticed a shadow. It was perfectly man-shaped and cast upon my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked, and it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alley. And I told myself that that's all there was to it. Then, there was what happened after. I came home from school the next day. My parents were there. So was a locksmith, and so were the police. My parents were there because, well, that's where they lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him as confusion over the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called them when the locksmith proceeded to pull the tip of a knife out of our lock. I was relieved to see that's where that knife tip had ended up, though, as they discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed. One on our garage, and one on my bedroom window. Fucked up Doctor Who fan. I swear to fucking God, I'm pretty sure a Doctor Who fan is fucking with me. So I live on a small horse farm. So about a week ago, I'm doing some chores outside, and I look up and I kid you not, I see some fucker dressed up pretty much dressed like the Watcher from Doctor Who, but not as nice clothes and not so starkly white a good distance away by the edge of the woods. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go Google his ass. So yeah, I basically shat in my pants, but he ran away as soon as I yelled up to the house into the woods. And there was a road a little ways in, so I think they went to their car or something like that. Well, I tell my dad about it, and he insists that I probably missaw or it's just some weirdo that didn't want to be seen apparently, and maybe didn't want to stumble on our property. I don't know, he was so dumb about it. But then about 2 days ago, my dad says he saw this person too, and he ran off as before. He called the police and they looked around, but they said there was little they could do right now. Like, what the fuck? I don't even like Doctor Who. I watch it with my friends, but I don't like it that much. But I don't know, they're mostly girls, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't one of them fucking with me. But I don't know, I don't think it's a murderer, just a weirdo. Halloween 2012. I've only posted in Let's Not Meet before, but I have quite the uncomfortable stories, and I just remember this one in particular. It was about a week before Halloween a few years back, and my parents were throwing a party. My sister and I had a few friends over, too, so we wouldn't get bored. My sister was in high school, and I was finishing junior high. It was getting late, but the party was still in full swing. Us kids were all hanging in the basement. All the adults upstairs were drunk. At some point, my sister got annoyed at the drunken adults. There's nothing here to drink except alcohol, and all the food's gone. So, somehow, she got permission for us to all go to 7-Eleven. The store is just down the street from my house, so 4 of us headed out. I was a little creeped, because my neighborhood barely has any streetlights, and it was almost midnight. But my sister promised we'd walk quick and back in no time. I tried to distract myself by making conversation, and it worked, until the headlights came up the street. A car, driving suspiciously slow, was making its way up the block. We walked faster, but the car only inched closer. It was too dark to see who was inside, but we could tell it was 2 people, a driver and a passenger. Then, we heard the voice out one of the car windows, as we all speed walked, near running. 4 girls, damn it! They're getting away! Is what one of the people in the car said. We were in full sprint after hearing that. Ran all the way to 7-Eleven. The car turned a corner looking for us, and the headlights disappeared. We went a different route on the way back home. I knew the whole thing was a bad idea from the start. Luckily, though, we lost the creeps. Let's never meet. Please. Creepiest Halloween of my life. So, when I was young, I went to that one house in town where the residents went all out and probably spent thousands of dollars getting the place perfect for Halloween. Now, this place was insanely well done, and I mean really freaking good. Albeit even as an adult, it competed with professional haunted houses. I believe the year was either 1999 or 2000, because I went as Darth Maul. I remember being literally scared out of my mind the previous few years, and I hoped the badassery of my character would provide me with some sort of courage. They blocked off the scene with a black tarp, and had everything you could ever want to see at such a house. A psycho shower scene with a zombie crawling out of a toilet, ghouls and imps climbing the tree, blood, gore, strobes, fog, everything. I remember feeling terrified, even with my double lightsaber. Even though I was scared to death to walk through it, I always admired the workmanship, as I knew that the props they had were either really expensive or took some good effort to make. To this day, I've never seen anyone have as horrible a yard as they did. As always, every year, I saw the house owners sitting on their porch, reveling in the terror they brought to the neighborhood, and handing out candy. So, as I nervously crossed the yard past flying banshees and impaled corpses, I noticed the main attraction at the end of the line. There, on what I guessed was probably the driveway, was the bottomless pit attraction. The illusion bewildered and chilled me, and though it was only lit by the lone light bulb, it made the box glow like a low burning furnace. I must have stared at it for a while when suddenly I heard a cough and a low hushed voice to my right. I don't really remember what was said, but I want to say it sounded like, "Hey, check this out," or "Hey, I want to show you something," in a gruff, hoarse tone. I looked over, and at first saw nothing but the wide gate to what was clearly the side of the owner's house. There was just a faint amount of the light from the glowing pit to illuminate the outlines of the gated fence. After adjusting my eyes, I noticed the figure standing completely still. In fact, it was so still, I remember thinking it was just another static prop. My young mind just didn't register a lot of this, and was still looking for the voice I heard, not realizing it had come from the figure, who I could just still barely make out. After a few moments, I heard the voice again. I realized it came from the figure and began to approach it. This was obviously a stupid idea, but in comparison to everything else that was happening around me, this figure seemed anything but imposing. So I cautiously approached the figure, trying to make sense of it. Suddenly, the figure began to move, and consequently I froze solid. The light from the amber glow lit up its face, just enough for me to make out its features. This I remember clearly. It was a straggly and rough-looking man, with a coarse gray beard and yellow teeth. His weathered and tattered clothing looked like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. He was smiling at me, though I had no idea why. But it unsettled me greatly. Under the hellish glow of the light bulb behind me, it felt wrong. It was as if, at that moment, I had acquired some clarity and realized his presence here obviously was not part of the show. And considering I already saw the owners clearly did not belong on the property, I screamed and ran out of there as fast as I could to the exit, not looking behind for a second. I probably got a few looks from the other kids around, but as I found my parents waiting outside, I told them about the man I saw. I saw one of the owners approach and ask if everything was all right. I'd said something like, "I didn't like the old man by the gate." He looked at me for a second and went, "What man?" I never went there again. Let's not meet creepy shadow man. I just wanted to carve a pumpkin. This happened about 9 years ago, when I was in 7th or 8th grade. I grew up in a nice area, and my mom taught at the elementary school inside the neighborhood I lived in, so she trusted me to stay home alone. As a bit of context, my house bordered the edge of the neighborhood, where a walking path led to a little shopping center that had a Basha's, Jack-in-the-Box, and a nail salon. The walking path was sort of hidden, surrounded by a lot of tall trees and bushes. It opened to the shopping complex on the left and a park on the right. It was a week before Halloween, and I had just gotten home from school. My parents were still at work, and my sister was at soccer practice, so I decided to walk to Basha's to get 2 pumpkins in order to surprise my family with a carved pumpkin by the time they got home. I scrounged together the change from my piggy bank, and I left my house for the store. When I turned the block and got to the walking path, I noticed that a man was sitting on one of the benches in the park. He immediately turned his head to look at me, and I got a weird feeling. I hurried and walked back into the Basha's. After buying my 2 pumpkins, I decided they were too heavy for a bag, so my plan was to walk my cart home and walk it back after dropping off the pumpkins. I left the store and faced the park to see the man was gone. I felt relieved until I turned towards the walking path. Behind the bushes and shrubbery, I could make out the man smoking a cigarette. My heart dropped to my stomach, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. I quickly marched down the walking path with my cart and decided not to make eye contact again. As I walked past the man, he stood up and began mumbling in my direction. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I could hear him step from the bushes onto the path behind me at the moment. I picked up my pace, and his mumbling got louder and his steps faster. I turned to see the man was now directly behind me. and he then began running after me, yelling incoherent words. I ditched the cart and took off down the street without looking back. When I got down to the end of the block, I turned around and saw that he had ran down the adjacent street. I called my mother in hysterics, and she rushed home. We called the police, and they did a report. The officer, a neighbor, and friend said there had been a series of burglaries in the area, but I have a feeling that wasn't what the man was planning on doing. Oh, and I did manage to go and retrieve my pumpkins later with my mom. Man that chased me while I was pumpkin shopping. Let's not meet again. We went to a haunted house. About a year ago, me and some friends went out to celebrate my birthday. After going to a movie, one of my friends asked if I wanted to go to a club/bar. I said sure, but everyone else wanted to get home as they had work the next day and were tired, etc. My friend Katie, her cousin Megan, and I headed to the club. We were having a good time, dancing, drinking a little bit, whatever. Then Katie saw a cute guy who she wanted to hook up with. She started steering our group over to his group, which was conveniently made up of him and two other dudes. We all get to chatting. It's relatively innocent, and then the boys ask us if we want to go to a bonfire at their work. They said a bunch of people would be there and it would be fun. I was a little nervous, but Katie was really feeling this guy, so I decided, why not? We left the club and followed the three guys about 20 minutes away by car. We each had DDs. The distance was really starting to sketch me out, but I tried to stay relaxed. We pulled up to this huge chain wire fence with a gate, and the guys typed in a code on a box that opened the gate. We drove through and the gate closed behind us. I looked around, but saw no bonfire and no other people. Now I was really starting to get scared. We were in a solitary enclosed space with three strange men, but everyone was smiling and laughing as we got out of the car, and I figured I was probably just being paranoid. The boys said that their coworkers had bailed and they were sorry. I asked where we were, and Katie's guy told us that we were at a haunted house, not the paranormal kind, but the fake Halloween kind, which was currently out of use since it was very old. He worked there in the fall, so he had the code. He asked us if we wanted to take a tour through the house and see the behind the scenes of how it all works. I thought that sounded really cool, and we all agreed. He led us into the actor's room, where the scarers would jump out. A door, and it led to this sort of maze of back pathways, where actors could run through the house unseen, and jump out in various locations at visitors. Now I should mention that by this point, the three guys had each selected a girl with whom they were trying to score with. The guy who had chosen me, Brian, was average looking, about 6 feet, dark hair. He seemed a little odd, like he didn't really know the other two that well, but they were all friends, so whatever. As we began walking through the main pathway of the haunted house, Megan and the guy she's disappeared into the back pathways. Suddenly, all the lights go off, a fog appears, and the music and noises of the house, they begin to start. I knew that the two of them had gone and turned the house on, but that didn't make it any less scary. I was now in an off-season haunted house alone with three strange guys, one of who was using the darkness as an excuse to grab onto me, even though I kept pushing him off. I held on to the back of Katie's shirt, scared to death I would lose her in the maze of hallways and be stuck alone with Brian. I was desperate to get out of the haunted house, unsure where Megan or the guy she was with were, or if they were going to pop out and scare us, or if she was even okay. But it felt like no matter where we turned, we weren't moving anywhere. We kept passing through the same room with a fake sarcophagus in it. I thought to myself, how the hell can I get out of this thing? Katie and her dude were obviously having a lot more fun than I was, and they giggled and walked ahead of us around a corner. When I followed them around the turn, they were gone. Now I was truly alone with Brian. He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, and I pulled back saying, "Hey, I'm really scared. I want to get out of this house. How do we get out?" He told me he didn't know. I responded, "Don't you work here?" "No," he said. "I just met those two guys at the club tonight." Alarms were sounding in my head, and I was in full panic mode. I took my phone out of my pocket and texted Katie, "Where the fuck are you? I want to get out of here," before I started pushing my way through the rest of the house. Finally, after what felt like hours of endless turns and hallways, and Brian grinding accidentally against me and asking me, "Why are you freaking out? Relax," I found the exit door. As I pushed through it into the open air of the outdoors, I felt a little better. Outside of the haunted house, I tried to reason with myself that these guys were probably harmless, and I was just being silly. I checked my phone, but Katie hadn't texted me back yet. I decided I was going to sit by the car and wait for them to return from wherever they were. Brian kept trying to talk me into walking with him somewhere else, but I refused. He checked his phone and said, "Oh, so-and-so texted me. He and Kate are out by the lake. You want to go there?" I desperately wanted to reunite with my friend who had the car keys and get the fuck out of there, so I agreed. We headed down a dark path towards the lake, and when we got there, I didn't see anyone. I called out for Katie but heard no response. Brian said, "Oh, they must have left already and gone back to the house or something. I'll text so-and-so to come back." I sat down on a picnic table to wait, and that's when Brian made his move. He sat beside me and then leaned over and aggressively kissed me, placing my hand on his groin, which was rock hard already. I pulled back and politely said, "No, thank you. I'm not in the mood." He tried again and again, and I said, "No, come on, just for a bit," he urged, placing my hand once more on his crotch. I stood up and walked a few steps away, shaking my head. Brian's expression changed. His eyes darkened, and his mouth set into a hard line. He stood up and started pacing and back and forth in front of me. "You've been fucking leading me all night, you tease. Why the fuck do the others get 2 girls who are down to fuck while I'm stuck here with you? All you girls are the fucking same. I'm not good enough. I'm never good enough." Then he turned to look at me and said something that sent shivers down my spine. "You know, a lot of guys wouldn't be so nice to you. Out here alone, a lot of guys wouldn't give you a choice." My phone beeped as he finished speaking, and I looked down to a text from Katie saying, "We're in the back office watching a movie. We've been here the whole time. Come join." Katie had never been at the lake. Brian had made that text up to get me out here alone. At this point, I was more frightened than I've ever been, and I didn't want to give that away. I didn't want to give Brian the satisfaction of knowing he had scared me, so I turned and walked back to the haunted house, with Brian about 10 feet behind. When I got back to the office, I told Katie and Megan, who were cuddled on the floor with the 2 other guys, that I wanted to leave, and Katie promised we would in a few minutes. I asked for the car keys at least, so I can sit in the car and avoid Brian, who was standing in the office corner with his arms crossed. I went to the car and sat in the back seat with the doors locked for over an hour, texting Katie every few minutes begging her to hurry up. It was now 4:30 a.m. and I was scared, tired, cold. At one point, Brian walked towards the car from the office, standing about 8 feet away and just staring at me. I kept the doors locked and avoided making eye contact. Finally, at 5 a.m., Katie and Megan walk to the car and we leave. I get home and pass out from exhaustion. When I wake up, I have a Snapchat friend request. When I check, it's from BrianX21. Apparently, Katie thought we hit it off and gave him my Snapchat name. Needless to say, I blocked his Snapchat, and I no longer speak to Katie. I was lucky that nothing truly bad happened that night, but when I think of what could have happened, when I think about Brian's voice and the veiled threat behind his words, my heart still skips a beat. So Brian, I sincerely hope I never ever meet you again. The horse farm with the free trampoline. Stranger danger was something my mother was hyper-vigilant about teaching us. She'd always warn us about the horse farm down the street and told us registered sex offenders lived there. Well, it was about a mile away, and I usually was only that far from home if I was on my bike or with a group, so I wasn't very concerned. One day, I was walking in my neighborhood when some neighbors I didn't know well began to talk to me. While we knew most of our immediate neighbors, this couple lived on a street perpendicular to ours, and I only interacted with them on special seasons. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. They told me they were giving away a trampoline, and oh man, I'd always wanted a trampoline. Begged my parents for one for years. I was so excited. I told them I had to ask my parents though. They told me I could have it. It was in the backyard waiting for me. And not to come back with my parents, I thought that was a little strange, and didn't listen to them about not getting my parents, but still wanted a trampoline nonetheless. Now, my dad is a totally oblivious person, so apparently when I told him this, it didn't raise any red flags, and he came along with me to ask about the trampoline. We knocked on their door and waited at their front steps, but no one came to the door. I was bummed. I really wanted that trampoline. Years later, reflecting on the event, I realized that there was a small fenced area in that yard where they'd sometimes ride a horse. I once even pet the horse and admired the owner as she rode. I didn't think of it as a farm, as aside from the one horse and fenced-in area, it was a normal yard, so my mother's warnings were in vain. I shudder, thinking about what would have happened if I had gone to the house alone. Thankfully, I had a bit of sense, though at the time, I didn't realize how close I was to danger, just how close I was to having a trampoline before those people inexplicably took my dream away. So, pedophile neighbors, let's not meet again, unless you're serious about the trampoline this time.